As we look at section 5.5, we're going to be focusing on two ideas today. And first is obviously factoring a greatest common factor, otherwise known as a GCF. And you may remember that from Algebra 1, but a GCF is the greatest common factor. And then the second is factoring out quadratic expressions in the form with ax squared plus bx plus c. And once again, that is going to be a review as we look back from Algebra 1. Anyway, let's start with a warm-up, reviewing the ideas of multiplying two binomials together. You may remember with two binomials together, it's important to multiply the first term times the other first term. That gives us x squared. And then the first term times the last term. Some people would call those the outsides. That's 5x. And then the inside term last times the first or the second term. So that would give us a 4x. And then finally the 4 times the 5. And that would give us 20. And the important thing here is to remember we multiplied the x times both the first term and the last term of the second one, and the 4 times the first term and the last term of the second one. A lot of people realize this and think of this as the acronym FOIL. And FOIL just stands for first, outer, inner, last. And once we've done our multiplying, then we're going to always combine our like terms. Let's take a look at part B of our warm-up. X squared, outside, negative 6x, inside, negative 3x, and last, positive 18. We combine our like terms, and we get 9x in the middle of a negative with an 18 at the end. Just as a review here, we've got a quadratic trinomial as a result of each of our problems. And those quadratic trinomials were created from two binomials multiplied together. Anyway, we're going to come back to that idea later today. And that's going to be kind of a kickoff to get our minds thinking of multiplying to get a trinomial, and then the reverse method today, which is called factoring. All right, let's look down to our greatest common factor idea. Greatest common factors involve finding the largest number and variable with the largest exponent that will go into both parts of the problem. For example, here we have 25x squared, and then we have 35. Hopefully you realize that a 5 can divide into both of those, so we're going to write the 5 out front, and then 5 times 5x squared equals 25x squared, and 5 times negative 7 equals 35. And so there it is. That is our factored form of our problem. We took out a GCF of 5, leaving us with an inside factor of 5x squared minus 7. Let's take a look over here at example 2. We can't take a number out on example 2, but we can take out an x as a greatest common factor. So x times 5x equals 5x squared, and x times 7 equals 7x. So once again, that is going to be our solution for factoring out a greatest common factor. On example 3, between 18 and 9, I hope you can realize that you can take a 9 out of both of those. And then between x squared and x, they both have an x in common. So on this problem, we have a situation where we not only have a number, but we also have a variable. 9 times 2 is 18, and x times x is x squared. 9x times what is negative 9x? Well, the answer to that is a minus 1. And I put this problem on here intentionally, knowing that a negative 1 often is a helpful idea to realize you can have a minus 1 as a factor for this third and final example. So that's greatest common factors. Hopefully that will be a fairly simple approach. You have three possibilities, either a number coming out, or a variable coming out, or a number and a variable coming out. And either way, the answer is not just the 5, the x, or the 9x, but the entire piece brought together. Moving down to our next part, we're going to talk about how we recognize what the signs are going to be in our resulting factors of our problem. So you remember, you're going to factor this ax squared plus bx plus c into two parentheses. And the real question is it going to be a plus or a minus? And in what positions are those pluses and minuses going to be? And so it's important to look for clues to figure out what that's going to be. And here I made a little chart for us that helps us to determine the clues. The first clue that you're going to look at is the sign of the C term, okay? So we're going to look at the sign of the last term, and so I'm going to put a C here. If the C is positive, then we look at the sign of the second term, and that leads us to either two choices, either a plus plus or a minus minus. If the C is negative, then that's going to lead us down to the fact very simply that the final two terms are going to be a plus and a minus. So we're just going to need to remember this, that a positive times a positive is a positive C, and a negative times a negative is a positive C. And so we really want to make sure that we're understanding that the positive C's are going to be here, the negative C's are going to be there. And then the final is going to make a determination if the middle term is positive, that'll be a positive B. This will be a negative B. And then on the final on the bottom, it doesn't matter what the B is. B could either be positive or negative. It does not matter. All right, well, let's look down and try our first problem. First thing we're going to do is we're going to look at our signs. And so in this problem, our signs are a plus and a plus. And so the C is a positive. So I'm just going to make a note that the C is positive. Because the C is positive, that is going to lead us to the fact that our signs are going to be positive. Next, we're going to look at what multiplies together to get 3x squared. Well, there's only one choice, 3x and x. So those are our factors of the front two. So our factors of 3 were 3 and 1. Now, what are the factors of 10? Well, we have 1 and 10, 2 and 5. Well, we're going to typically go with the middle two factors just because it's more likely that they're going to happen. So we're going to stick in a 2 and a 5. And now we're going to try and see what we do. And we're going to do this by fold. Now we know that 3x times x is our 3x squared, and we know that 2 times the 5 is the 10. So it's not really a question of the first term or the last term. What it is a question is the middle term. That's 17x. And to get that 17x, we say it's either got to be a 2 and a 5 or a 5 and a 2. Now I just randomly put a 2 and a 5 in here. Let's check with outside and inside if this works. Well, outside is 15x, inside is 2x. They combine to get 17x. And so indeed, we did get the answer. It's 3x plus 2 times x plus 5. Now, I realize that that was a chance. We could have had the 5 and the 2 there, and if we had, it would have been a different result down here. And then since that didn't work, we would have quickly flipped back to the 2 and the 5. So usually it's going to work out pretty straightforward. We're just going to have to try and guess what we have and make logical guesses. But the way you want to start generally is the closest numbers together as your best bet. All right, let's look at our next one. Number 5. Our clue on number 5 as we start number 5 is the fact that we have a positive at the end. Because we have a positive at the end, we know that our signs are either plus plus or minus minus. And so I'm going to put C as positive, but I'm going to put B as negative. And because B is negative, that means we have two negatives are adding to the B, but they're multiplying to the positive C. All right, let's fill in the rest of what we know. 7a squared. The only things that multiply to 7a squared is 7a and 1a. The only things that multiply to 3 are either 1 and 3 or 3 and 1. Just for the heck, I'm going to put in 3 and 1. Let's see if that works. negative 1a, negative 3a. Sorry, that first one was negative 7a. Well, that combines to negative 10a. And so once again, we were good. Our answer is 7a minus 3 and a minus 1. If you would happen to have chosen 1 and 3, you would have gotten a negative 22a here, quickly realizing that that's not going to be the answer, and so we'd switch then to the 1 and the 3. Let's slide over here and look at number 6. First thing we're going to once again look at is the fact that the c is negative. If the c is negative, then our signs are going to be a plus and a minus. Don't worry about which is the order right now. I'll explain that at the end. All right, what do we know for sure? Well, we have that negative 3 at the back end. That means we've got to have a 3 and a 1. There's no other options. What are our options for the 8y squared? Well, the factors of 8 are either 1 and 8, and the other option is 2 and 4. I'm going to go with the ones that are closest together, which is the 2 and the 4, and let's just throw those in. Since the 2 came first, I'm going to put the 2 first, and we're going to see how that works. So let's do our FOILing. Outside, negative 2y. Inside, positive 12y. Now I just noticed that I forgot to put the y there. We add these together, and we get positive 10y. Well, here, that is the opposite of what we want, because we want a negative 10y. When you have an answer that has the opposite middle term of what you want, you switch the signs. So what I mean by that is my answer is 2y minus 3 and 4y plus 1. And so there we go. Once again, the reason we had opposite signs is because the c was negative. On our number 5, the reason we had the same signs was the c was positive, but to get negative in the middle, that means we have to have two negatives multiplied together. Let's look down at number 7. The first thing we're going to assess, first of all, is what is the c? Well, the c is a negative. What does that tell you? You have one sign is positive, the other sign is negative. Clues to follow here. The easiest factor to deal with is the 5x squared. So we're going to put a 5x and a 1x. And once again, don't worry about the signs. If we have to flip them at the end, we will. What are my factors of 8? Well, my factors of 8 are 1 and 8, 2 and 4. Let's go with the interior ones, 2 and 4. So I'm going to put the 2 in, put the 4 in. We multiply, negative 20x, positive 2x. Well, that's negative 18x. Certainly it's not positive 6, so that one did not work. So let's try the next one. I'm going to recopy it down here. 5x plus 1x minus, and instead of the 2 and the 4, we're going to put 4 and 2 and just try the other one. Now we get negative 10x, positive 4x. Those combine to negative 6x. What do we want? We want a positive 6x. I hope you remember what we need to do. All we need to do is change the signs of the 5x plus 4 to a 5x minus 4 and an x plus 2. And I hope you do realize that we're not going to actually write a 1x in our answer. Let's take a look at number 8. First thing, once again, we check the value of our c, and our c is negative. So, what does that mean? That means we're going to have a plus and a minus. Here we have some interesting situations because 6 has two possibilities, 1 and 6, 2 and 3, and 20 is a number of possibilities, 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. I'm going to stick with the ones that are close together because they typically are what we end up going with. Our 7x, you notice in the middle, is not an extreme number, and so we're just going to put in 2x, and 3x. And then I'm going to choose 4 and 5. I have no idea if these are going to work, but let's try. Our inside is positive 12x. Our outside is negative 10x. Well, that gets us positive 2x. Certainly not a 7x, and so we're going to have to switch it around. Let's now switch. We're going to change that 5 and 4, and we're going to flip those, and we're going to move those to the opposite spots. So I'm going to erase these other parts that we had before. Now our inside is 15x, and our outside is negative 8x. What does that get us? A positive 7x. Very close. That's the opposite of what we want. So I hope you remember by now, all you do to get your answer is flip the signs. 2x minus 5, 3x plus 4. Okay. So by now, I hope you realize that the first thing you need to do is look at the values of your C's. Those values of C's are really going to be important as we're starting off our problems. And once we've identified those values of C's, then we can figure our signs, which lets us then kind of deduce our problem. Let's look at our last one, number 9. We've got 7x squared minus 7x plus 12. Hopefully by now you're focusing on the C. The C is a positive, so that quickly then says, okay, let's look at our B. Our B is a negative. If the C is positive and the B is negative, that means we're multiplying to a positive, adding to a negative. The only way that happens is with 2 minuses. This is a nice one because we have an x squared, so we can just put an x and an x there. And we have a couple options for 12. Either 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. Well, hopefully you're picking up by now the pattern. Let's start with the middle terms and we'll work up from there. If we put a 3 there and a 4 there, that's negative 3x, that's negative 4x. They combine to negative 7x, and we've got it. So my answer very quickly, x minus 3, x minus 4. One little trick, just so you know, if you have an x squared right there, then if the numbers either add or subtract, depending on the signs, up to the middle term. And so 3 plus 4 is 7. All right, so that kind of concludes what we're talking about today. We've learned that we need to focus on the C's. Very important idea. And if we're focusing on those C values, then it's really going to lead us to what our signs are for our problems. And so those C values become critical. If the C is negative, the signs are the opposite. If the C is positive, then the signs will be the same. And back here on our very first one, you notice the C is positive, but the B term is also positive, which is why we are leading ourselves to 2 positives there. Don't forget about greatest common factors, all the way back from the beginning, looking for what the largest number and variable are that go into all the terms of a problem. Before we finish, I need to help you understand that you could have a greatest common factor in a trinomial, something along the lines of this. And so let's just say we had this as our trinomial. The greatest common factor in this problem would be a 2 and an x, leaving us with x squared plus 6x plus 5. And if you're really quick on the ball, you realize that 5 factors down to x plus 1 and x plus 5. That's kind of an advanced idea, but you need to realize that sometimes the GCF is not the final stopping point of a problem, but it could go further. None of our homework problems tonight will do that, but down the line, we are going to see that occurring. I hope this has been helpful in explaining section 5.4a to you. We're going to continue this discussion tomorrow with 5.4b, and we'll kind of go from there. Take care.